All right. Diving right in today. You sent this press conference over, this Trump press conference,
Yeah,
and wow,
a lot going on.
there's a lot going on. A lot of really fascinating stuff to unpack.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I guess maybe just starting right at the top with these appointments that he makes right out of the gate.
Yeah.
5 special envoys.
Uh-huh.
We got Steve Winnick heading over to the Middle East.
Sorry.
Mauricio Kleber Carone. Looks like focusing on Latin America.
All right.
Retired General Keith Kellogg, going to be tackling the Russia-Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
Richard Grenell for special missions, and then Mark Burnett heading to the UK.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, the choice of envoys and where they're going kind of tells you a little bit about maybe what the priorities are.
Right.
Yeah, sending a former general to the Russia-Ukraine conflict,
Yeah.
suggests that we're thinking about hard power
Yeah.
and security in that region.
Yeah, for sure. And then he goes on to, I guess this is probably the biggest thing that we need to talk about is this U.S. sovereign wealth fund that he wants to create.
Yeah, he says it's going to be one of the
He
biggest.
says it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
And I don't really fully understand, like, how does that work? Is that even
Yeah.
a thing that we can just do?
Well, it's interesting because, sovereign wealth funds are typically
Right.
for countries that have a lot of, natural resource revenue,
Right.
like oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
The U.S. doesn't really fit that mold.
Right.
So it raises the question of like, well, what are the assets
Yeah.
that would even go into this thing?
Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, he gives one example, which is interesting. He says, during COVID,
Okay.
like the government could have used its purchasing power
Uh-huh.
to buy, billions of dollars worth of vaccines.
Yeah.
But instead of just buying them outright,
Yeah.
they could have said, we'll buy these,
Right.
but we want equity
Right.
in your company.
Right.
And that's sort of an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
Could you scale that up
To the entire
to
economy.
the entire economy?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It seems pretty tricky.
It's kind of a wild idea.
It is a wild idea.
And then he even mentions TikTok as a potential asset
Yeah.
for this fund.
Like maybe some kind of deal or
Through Ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, classic Trump, right?
Yeah.
Thinking outside the box.
I mean,
But it also kind of raises the question of like,
it's a little weird, right?
yeah, is that really appropriate?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And then he brings in Elon Musk
Yeah.
to help identify government waste
Yeah, what a choice.
and gives him access to treasury payment systems.
That's pretty wild.
And he lists all these what he calls ridiculous expenditures,
Right.
like $100 million on condoms to Hamas,
Okay.
and all these other things.
So that's a very high profile audit.
Yeah,
You got Elon Musk in there looking at the books.
yeah,
But it's also, I think, it does raise some questions about
yeah.
conflicts of interest.
Well, especially, Elon Musk, right? He's got.
I mean, he's got his fingers in a lot of pies.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So, is that really the right person to be doing this?
yeah. And, Trump says, there are safeguards in place and only I can approve anything.
Okay.
But still, it does kind of raise the question of like, is that
You
a
know.
little too close for comfort?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And then we get into this,
yeah. Another big one.
another big area for him, which is this whole trade and tariffs.
Yeah. He loves to talk about.
And reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah.
And he spends quite a bit of time in this press conference talking about,
Yeah.
trade deals and the potential tariffs with Mexico, Canada, China,
Yeah. He calls them all out.
the EU.
Yeah.
And it really seems like he sees trade as kind of a zero-sum game.
Well, that is, I think, a key takeaway
Yeah.
from this is that, his approach to trade is very different
Yeah.
from the sort of traditional free trade model.
Right.
He's definitely more willing to use tariffs
Yeah.
as a weapon.
Yeah. Even against allies.
Yeah. And, economists have been debating that for a long time. Like,
Right.
are tariffs effective?
Yeah.
Um,
So starting with Mexico,
okay.
he announces that they've reached an agreement
All right.
where Mexico is going to deploy 10,000 soldiers to their southern border
Wow.
to try and address the illegal immigration
Yeah.
and the fentanyl trafficking.
Okay.
But then he also kind of hints that tariff negotiations are still ongoing.
So it's like a carrot and a stick.
Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
interesting.
He's praising them, but he's also got this threat
Yeah,
hanging over their heads.
yeah. And then he turns to Canada
Oh, boy.
and he
Not holding back.
No, he does not hold back.
Yeah.
No. He criticizes their trade practices.
Yeah.
And, even jokingly suggests that they should just become the 51st state.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. But even as a joke, it kind of reveals.
Yeah, it's very telling.
Yeah, how he sees Canada.
Yeah.
Not really as an ally, but more of a competitor.
Right.
Yeah.
And then things get even a little more heated when he starts talking about China.
Yeah.
And the EU.
Yeah.
He threatens China with higher tariffs over fentanyl coming into the U.S. and even floats this idea of reparations for COVID-related losses.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and then
That's a bold statement.
For the EU, he really slams their trade surplus with the U.S. Says that they have a $350 billion trade surplus.
Yeah.
And accuses them of all these unfair restrictions on American products.
And it's interesting how he kind of lumps China and the EU together as this sort of
economic rivals.
Yeah, even though they're traditional allies. It really shows you that America first philosophy.
Yeah. And then he goes on this whole historical detour.
This is what I love about him.
About the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic Trump.
And how, 38,000 American lives were lost building this canal and how much money it cost. And then he slams Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, for giving it away.
To Panama.
Yeah, he's got strong opinions about that.
He does.
Yeah.
And he even hints that he wants to renegotiate the canal treaty or even reclaim control of the canal.
The Panama Canal, that would be huge.
I know. Yeah. It's a
geopolitical earthquake.
Yeah, it's remarkable how this one press conference touches on so many complex issues.
Like, we've got a potential U.S. sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah.
We've got trade wars brewing.
Yeah.
We've got Elon Musk auditing the government.
Yeah.
And we might be getting the Panama Canal back.
It's really wild.
It's wild, yeah.
It's
a glimpse into how he sees the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess my initial reaction is I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole sovereign wealth fund idea.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, it's definitely...
And if it is, what would the implications even be?
Yeah, and those are great questions, and we can delve into those a little bit further.
Okay.
But before we do, I do want to touch on a couple other intriguing moments from this press conference.
Okay.
Like his comments about the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
And his little analogy for Israel's position in the Middle East.
Okay.
So, so with the Russia-Ukraine thing...
Okay.
He's really focused on those rare earth resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
To making sure the U.S. has access to them.
Right.
Which makes sense, given his focus on, economic competitiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he had this kind of weird analogy for Israel.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He was comparing it to the top of a pen.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's a very vivid way to make the point, that Israel's in a tough spot.
Yeah, yeah.
Surrounded by much larger neighbors.
Yeah.
And a very volatile region.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he mentions the ceasefire in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And kind of lets his Middle East envoy, Steve Winnick, give a quick assessment.
Yeah. And I think that's a smart move.
Yeah.
It shows confidence in his appointee.
Yeah.
And it also kind of reinforces this idea that things are constantly changing.
Right.
A lasting peace is not guaranteed.
Right.
And so by giving Winnick that platform, it kind of signals that, we're actively engaged.
We're paying attention.
Yeah. It's just amazing to me how he weaves in all these seemingly off-the-cuff remarks.
Yeah.
And, personal anecdotes, like when he mentions Murdoch and Larry Ellison.
Right.
Being there at the press conference.
Yeah, it's all part of his style.
Blending the policy stuff with the personal stuff.
Yeah.
But, he doesn't shy away from controversial topics either.
Oh, no. He had some pretty pointed comments about Tulsi Gabbard, Edward Snowden, even called the FBI a corrupt institution.
Classic Trump.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the whole reparations thing.
Yeah.
With China.
Yeah. That seems like a really risky move.
It's highly controversial.
Yeah.
Some people say, China should be held accountable for the pandemic.
Right.
Others say, this is just a way to deflect blame.
Right.
But regardless, the implications are huge.
Yeah.
If the U.S. were to formally pursue reparations, that could trigger a major standoff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's really serious.
He seems to be.
About renegotiating that treaty.
Yeah. And, That would be a huge deal.
Yeah. The Panama Canal is so important for global trade.
I mean, any change to its ownership would send shockwaves.
Yeah, yeah. And he did mention China's influence in the region.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if that's part of his thinking.
Yeah.
Is he trying to counter China's Belt and Road initiative?
It's fascinating how all these things seem to connect.
I know. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
Yeah. So what's the bigger picture here?
Well, I think it's a vision of America as a dominant force in the world.
Okay.
He wants to leverage our power to get good trade deals, to protect our resources, and to counter rivals like China.
Right.
And he's not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely likes to shake things up.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I mean, is that vision realistic?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's no doubt that his approach has had some short-term wins.
Yeah.
But is it sustainable?
Yeah.
In the long run.
Right.
And his tactics have definitely alienated some allies.
Right.
And escalated tensions with rivals.
Yeah.
So it's a high-stakes gamble.
Yeah. It's a lot to process. Yeah. Now, we haven't even talked about some of the other stuff.
We haven't.
Like National Heart Month.
Right.
His comments about the FBI.
Yeah, we can circle back to those if you want. But first, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this bigger picture.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to you?
I mean, it's definitely a bold vision.
Yeah.
And I can see the appeal. Yeah. But I also wonder about the costs. Could this lead to more conflict?
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
His focus on confrontation could backfire.
Right.
There are other ways to advocate for our interests.
Yeah. And this sovereign wealth fund, I'm still not sold.
Yeah.
It just seems like a massive government intervention in the market.
Yeah, and historically,
that
hasn't always worked out well.
Right.
It can lead to inefficiencies.
Right.
And unintended consequences.
Yeah, he made it sound so simple.
I know.
Just use government assets to generate wealth.
Yeah, but in reality, it's way more complicated. You need expertise.
Yeah.
You need transparency.
Right.
And you need accountability.
Yeah, and wouldn't that create a conflict of interest?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If the government's both a regulator and a major investor.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot to think about.
It is.
I really appreciate you breaking all this down for me.
Of course, it's been my pleasure. This press conference was really something else.
There really was.
It's a reminder that these seemingly simple announcements can have huge implications.
Yeah. Well, it definitely highlights the importance of staying informed.
Absolutely.
And engaging in these kinds of conversations.
Exactly. And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to keep exploring these topics.
Yes.
Do your own research. Form your own conclusion.
Exactly. Don't just take our word for it. Dig deeper, challenge assumptions.
Yeah.
And most importantly, talk to each other.
Yeah, have those conversations. The world is full of complex challenges.
It is.
And it's through dialogue and critical thinking that we can figure things out.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold vision, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I also wonder about the human cost.
Right, yeah.
Will this approach actually lead to more conflict and more instability? I
mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
Focusing so much on confrontation.
Right.
And, winning at all costs.
Yeah.
That could backfire.
Yeah.
There are other ways to, stand up for our interests.
Without, alienating our allies.
Yeah.
And provoking our adversaries.
And this whole sovereign wealth fund thing, I'm still really skeptical.
Yeah. It's a big idea.
Yeah.
And it's not without its risks.
Right. It just seems like such a massive government intervention.
Right. And historically, those haven't always gone well.
Right.
They can lead to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, you made it sound so simple.
I know, right? Like, just take some government assets and poof.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
You need expertise to manage a fund that big.
Right.
You need transparency so people know what's going on.
Right.
And you need accountability.
Yeah. And wouldn't that also create a conflict of interest?
Oh, absolutely. If the government is both the regulator and a major investor in the market, that's a recipe for trouble.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot to digest.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, I really appreciate you walking me through all of this.
Of course, happy to do it. This press conference was really something.
It really was.
I mean, it just goes to show that these policy announcements, they can have really big implications.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how important it is to stay informed.
For sure.
And, engage in thoughtful conversations.
Yeah, and that's what we try to do here on The Deep Dive.
Yeah.
So we really encourage you to keep exploring these topics. Yeah. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. Don't just take our word for it.
Yeah.
Dig deeper, challenge your assumptions.
And most importantly, talk to each other.
Yeah.
Have these conversations.
Yeah, because, the world is full of these complex challenges.
Yeah.
And, it's through dialogue and critical thinking.
Exactly.
That we can, start to figure some of this stuff out.
I completely agree.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.